of the tools and the creativity and the flexibility that I've seen in teachers has been just, I'll just say, inspiring.
Well, being, I guess you say, the veteran teacher, technology was I guess you would say, learning curve for me. How to keep the kids, even here at school and even at home, engaged.
Science. So this is my rolling classroom. 6th grade, we try to give them a middle school experience. So they move from class to class, but this year they're staying in that classroom and the teachers are moving. And being that I teach science, I always have props. Because if you don't laugh through all this, you will cry.
After we pick up our first load of kids, I'll go ahead and wipe down as soon as they get off. When we get back here, especially today is a Friday, the school district has supplied us with 5-gallon pumps. We'll bring them out. It's got sanitizing agent in it, and we'll go ahead and sanitize the entire bus so that it's ready for Monday. That's what makes it worth it to me, the kids.
During the pandemic, we stepped up to feed the kids while the school was closed. But we noticed that a lot of adults was going hungry, so we also started feeding adults. And every week it would go up. It went up to 300, then it went up to 6. I got up to 1,400 meals.
It sounds cliche, but it is about love, loving your students and showing them that you care, showing up every single day.
It's an opportunity for our students to actually live in the world of an adult, like real life here, instead of being in a classroom, because they had to take the initiative to do everything.
I also came up with a design. It follows the same 3D hole punch.
My first distance learning assignment was about making 3D printers. And then at the end, the question was, do you think you have enough skill to make your own face shield?
If I can help the community in even the smallest way through this, I wanted to do it.
The teachers must rise to the challenge to not just adapt to what's going on today, but how can we be able to take what we develop with our students now and use that in the future to help transform education even more.
Welcome, everyone. I am Evelyn de Jesus, and it is my great honor to serve as Executive Vice President of the most amazing union in America today, the American Federation of Teachers. What a fantastic collection of workshops you've been able to attend today. I want to lift up all the civics education sessions supporting you to be the warriors for democracy that we need so badly right now. Especially now that state bans on teaching honest history are denying our kids an opportunity to learn perspective, tolerance, and an accurate view of our country. And if you didn't get to the workshop teaching about Asian American community and history as the officer overseeing the Asian American and Pacific Islander Task Force, let me encourage you to go back and watch the recording. It is led by not our guy, AFT's Kent Wong, Tracy Lai, and Emily Reyes. It's a wonderful, proactive, state-of-the-art intervention into an incredibly timely subject. Which brings me to our tremendously exciting speaker this afternoon, Dr. Dena Simmons, who will be joining us remotely, is a renowned educator, activist, teacher, educator, diversity facilitator, and curriculum developer, and most recently, the founder of LiberatED. She's going to talk to us about social and emotional learning, but maybe a little differently than how we are used to hearing about it. She has an impressive resume, and it's much too long for this introduction. Instead, I want to tell you a little story about her that speaks volumes about who she is. Last June, she writes, "While in quarantine, I became the victim of a hate crime. Shattered, I had no choice but to focus on my healing. In the process, I rediscovered my voice, the one that had been policed, silenced, and punished for the past 6 years because it was as I was told, too strong and too powerful. Does this sound familiar to any of you warriors out there? She goes on, and I quote, "I needed my voice to ring louder than other people's doubts, slights, and limitations. For me, that has led to the development of LiberatED, a new program that takes an anti-racist approach to social and emotional learning and healing." Wow, I just can't wait. I am proud of my union for bringing us teachers like Dr. Dena Simmons for us to learn from, and I am honored to be able to introduce her today. At the end of Dena's talk, we will have a roundtable with members to reflect on what she shares with us. With that, welcome, Dr. Simmons. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So nice to be here. First of all, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and for sharing people a little bit about my journey. But I am joined by Chloe, who is being very, very needy right now. So it's hot here and where I am, and she's not helping the situation. But I'm super excited to be a part of this amazing conference. Who, by the way, the AFT, also is unapologetic in supporting educators in this current backlash of anti-racism. So I wanted to shout you all out for that as well. And so anyway, I'll be talking about self-care, healing, and racially just practices for the current moment, for during our pandemic, for when the world feels heavy. But I want to start by sharing with you this quotation by Martin Luther. And I invite you to when I think about this quotation, even if I knew that tomorrow the world would go to pieces, I would still plant my apple tree. When I think about that quotation in my work with social justice, we may not see the fruits of our labor. Those of us who are out there being warriors, union organizers, community organizers, educators, teaching the truth, teaching for humanity. We do this anyway. We plant the tree. And so I just want to put that there just as a preface of my presentation of for the moments when it gets difficult, for the moments when you were told you were too little, too much, not enough, think about that apple tree and plant it anyway. So I just want to share our pandemic context, right? We've seen, and you all have experienced, the increase and the heightened health and education disparities. They've always existed, but if we didn't see them before, we see them now. We've all experienced heightened levels of anxiety, frustration, because there's been so much uncertainty. Are we going back to school? Are we doing hybrid? Are we all in person? That has truly impacted, our levels of stress and frustration. We've also lost, some of us have suffered from illness, may have gotten COVID-19 yourselves, and some of us have suffered the loss of loved ones. I unfortunately have now 8 people that I've lost to COVID-19. Recently, a friend from high school who was 39 with 4 children, just after giving birth to her 4th child, passed away, and lost a cousin and friends. So this has been, really hard for many of us, including myself. We've also known that part of our learning during this pandemic is that we were unable to reach some families. And so that's a moment for us to pause and reflect and ask, what were we not doing before that we were unable to reach those families? And what can we do now to be better for those families that we serve? Now, we also realize as well that not all of our students, and we've known this, had the resources that they needed to thrive successfully. We all don't thrive virtually, but some of us do, and I don't want to put that out there, that's only, out there. So in about March, in the beginning of the pandemic, I wrote this piece for educational leadership for ASCD, and I reflected on how COVID-19 is our equity check. And we have suffered a lot of loss and frustration and stress. But at the same time, this has been an opportunity for us to reflect, for us to see what we were not doing well, and for us to innovate. We saw how communities and corporations came together to provide for our young people, to support our teachers and our schools. And we have to, as we go into the next school year, we have to keep that same energy. How do we ensure those partnerships continue? How do we ensure that we continue to provide to our students the resources? We got to keep that same energy. We saw news reports in the beginning also of the pandemic of the racial inequities, related to, the pandemic. The research shows us that, Black, Indigenous people of color, BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous people of color were more, disproportionately suffered from and died from COVID-19. So, what we can say on top of that is that not only did, Black and BIPOC folks suffer through and die from the pandemic at higher rates, we've also seen overwhelming anti-Blackness publicized on display, right? We had no choice on May 25th, 2020 to watch our brother, George Floyd, have a knee to his neck for nearly 9 minutes, calling for his mother and saying that he cannot breathe. Just every time I think about that moment, I think about the disregard for Black life. We heard the story of Breonna Taylor and the erroneous drug raid, and Rashad Brooks and Ahmaud Arbery, who went running and was killed in vigilante violence. Tony McDade, Jacob Blake did not die, but his life will never be the same, and neither will his children, who had to watch their father be shot, right? So we have all of this trauma, right? This trauma of all of this. And I'm very clear to say that these people are our brothers and sisters, they are our siblings. And that is, it's important for us to begin to talk about the people that we lose as family, because my hope is that one day we can treat each other like family. And so we can say that just as Black people, right, are often triggered and experience a collective trauma when we see publicized anti-Black violence. You can also say the same is true for pandemic-related racial disparities. And in fact, Black people suffer at higher rates what scholars are calling coronavirus trauma. Also in the pandemic, I wrote this piece called, If We Aren't Addressing Racism, We Aren't Addressing Trauma. I'm gonna say that again, because I want you to hear this. If we aren't addressing racism, we aren't addressing trauma. You have to understand that my body is filled with so much racial trauma. You heard in my bio that I was a victim of a racist attack in a space that was supposed to be safe. So many of our students go to school in a space that is supposed to be safe to not be safe, to experience the trauma of racism. You can read this piece, but I want to highlight a particular area of this piece that I wrote. And I want for you to really be open to what I'm sharing here. This is a part of a larger piece. And if there's any discomfort that you feel in hearing this, I want you to really interrogate what's causing your discomfort and whose feelings are you centering when you feel that discomfort, and how do we move forward and move through that discomfort so that we can create the necessary social change for our future. And so what I said was, just imagine the damage done to our Black students' psyches when at school. They are made invisible in academic content and yet glaringly visible through over-surveillance and policing, right? There's 3 decades of research that reveal that BIPOC children are suspended and expelled at a rate 3.5 times greater than their white peers. So there's research to back that up. And what do white children learn from these very same triggering images of Black death and a white-centered curricula that dominate many of our nation's classrooms? They learn how to unsee and devalue Black lives. They learn how to feel nothing about Black suffering. Let us not forget that there were people who decided that the community in Flint, Michigan should be drinking dirty water, Someone makes that decision, and that person who makes, those politicians who make that decision, decide a value on someone's life. And so how do we as educators prevent Flint, Michigan from happening? And that is our work. And it is to sit in the discomfort of what I'm saying here and to move past it and to work toward the social change that we need. So the coronavirus, the pandemic, and the civil unrest has created so much heaviness for all of us, right? There is a collective trauma that all of us are feeling. And for the teachers who are out there, even before the coronavirus, we were burnt out and stressed. Teaching is one of the most difficult and stressful professions, yet y'all do it every day. Yet, as you saw in the videos, you created magic. You created magic in your classrooms during the pandemic for creativity and that finesse and magic that only educators have. But we also know that when teachers are stressed, students are stressed, right? There is a construct or a theory called the emotion contagion theory. So it's exactly what it sounds like. Emotions are contagious. Now, I want you to think about your life, right? Do you know anyone in your life that, you may call a Dena Downer? And when you're in their presence, you're like, yeah, that does suck. Oh my God, I hate that too. Do you? No, seriously, think about it. Maybe you need to not spend so much time with that person because emotions are contagious. But one of the things that I think I want to stress is that a stressed and burnt out teaching force is an equity issue. We don't often talk about that. We talk about self-care. We throw all of that stuff in there. But when we don't take care of our educators, it is an equity issue because a stressed and burnt out teaching force is an equity issue. What we know from the research is that when teachers who report high stress and burnout, that their classrooms have less warm interactions, students don't do as well, and the school and classroom climate suffers. So I'm gonna say it again, a stressed and burnt out teaching force is an equity issue. We must take care of our educators. And these studies, that these articles that I shared with you were from before the pandemic. And so there's a ton of research that started coming out in 2020 and 2021 about the increase in the anxiety, frustration, emotional exhaustion of educators, right? Because what was already difficult, which was our jobs and stressful, got even more difficult after the pandemic. And so, after the pandemic, I, like most of you, started working virtually. And so, during one of my days, my older sister was like, hey, sis, can you do auntie lesson time with your niece and nephew? Because I have to have a meeting and it's just an hour. So I was like, yeah, sure, I got this. Sis, I got you. So let me just show you how that went.
Letters in her name. Oh.
Hey, children. See, didn't I say somebody would get hurt? Because guess who plays too rough? This one here, your sister. Dean, what did you say about our names?
What?
Kelly.
We have 10 letters?
Yes. Guess who you're named after?
You?
Yeah, Kelly. I don't see your face and it's worrying me.
Oh, my initials are named after my grandpa.
Your initials are after your grandpa? That's great.
Yeah.
Y'all, it was a hot mess. It was a hot mess. So like the whole time my niece is like knocking my nephew with a pillow. At one point, I'm trying to like come up with tricks of the trade. I tell my nephew to go grab things around the house that he can spell. And so he grabs the ketchup out of the fridge. And I'm like, oh my goodness, my sister's gonna come upstairs and there's gonna be ketchup everywhere. Fortunately, that did not happen. And they have like white everything. But he starts eating it from the ketchup bottle. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't know how teachers are doing this. On top of this, some of you all were expected to teach virtually and in person at the same time. I saw my niece's teacher doing that and I'm like, that is totally not fair. So we are in need of extra tender loving care after the past year and a half of the coronavirus. Y'all made magic happen anyway. So when I think we are in need of a tender loving care, and when I think of care and I think of self-care, the first person I think of is Black lesbian poet Audre Lorde. She wrote in this book, Burst of Light, the following: caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. And I think it's important for you all to understand the context of when she wrote that. She wrote this after being denied medical leave after 2 cancer diagnoses. So I think when we think about care, we have to understand that care is not equitably distributed, right? Just look, when I walk down, I'm from New York City, and when I taught in the Bronx and when I traveled in New York my whole life, I would see the disparities of care just taking the subway, right? If you saw anything on Instagram in the past few days and you saw the flooding, it happened in the Bronx, right? The Bronx is what has some of the poorest congressional districts. And so we have to think about, who gets cared for and who does not get cared for. And we have to also think about that in our schooling and in our education system. In New York City's education system, that's the system I taught in. President Randy, you were the president of the U of T when I was at the U of T, in the U of T. And we just, our school I didn't even have textbooks. I had to make my own worksheets. So this care is not distributed equitably. And I think we need to understand that, like, when you think about stress and burnt out and how that impacts our students, it is crucially important for us to take care of ourselves and for our school systems to take care of us so that we can take care of our students. Essentially, the first relationship we have is with ourselves. We have to know who we are, how we're doing, and what we can and cannot do. Because what we know is that hurt people, and that healed people heal people. And if we have not dealt with our trauma or our distress, it shows up in our interactions. And we want to do whatever we need to do to mitigate that. And essentially, we are our first data point. And so how are you going to develop that self-awareness so that you can be and give the best of yourself to others and also to yourself? And so the way it's important as we sort of take note of our own self-data, that we understand how stress shows up in ourselves, but also in other people. We know that it shows up in our behavior, right? When we feel stressed, we may lose our appetite. We may feel an urge to drink alcohol or smoke or, engage in drug use more. We may nail bite. I am guilty. I am a nail biter when I'm stressed. Also, cognitively impacts us. It influences how we think. We may find that we're ruminating or worrying about something or have difficulty remembering. And in our emotions, we may feel irritable or have an inability to relate to people, be withdrawn because of depression and lowered self-esteem, or in our physicality, we may feel the tension with tension headaches. We may feel it in our shoulders. You all have an idea where you feel it. Some of us get stomach aches and feel nauseous. That is definitely me. So just putting that out there, that as we sort of pay attention to ourselves, we recognize when we're feeling stressed so that we can understand that it is time to make some boundaries and take care of ourselves, but also for our students. How can we also pay attention to how stress may manifest in our students, especially toxic stress, which is the reoccurrence of a stressful or traumatic experience for young people. And if you all probably know that there's always that student who always has to use the bathroom, who always have a headache or stomach ache. That's data. Maybe I'm guilty of saying, okay, are you just trying to get out of class? I'm guilty, but that's also data to say, is this student okay? And so as we think about this work and get back into in-person instruction, paying attention to that is crucially important. Because, if we don't pay attention to how we're doing and the data that our body is telling us and our mind, and we have nothing left to give, what do we have to offer? So if we have nothing left to give, what do we have to offer? And so as we engage in that important self-care, we first have to be able to identify what is causing our burnout. and what is burning out our candles at both ends. And so I want to share with you this reflection tool kind of called a burnout inventory that I learned from my friend, Dr. Misha Mosley. And essentially, burnout is a very complex construct, but you can break it down into workload, right? Is your work, do you have too much work? Is that causing your burnout? Or maybe you feel like you have a lack of control or influence that can cause burnout, or feeling undervalued that causes burnout, or feeling disconnected and socially isolated, which was real for a lot of us during physical distancing protocols. And then also fairness. Am I experiencing discrimination or microaggression, so on and so forth? And then are my values aligned to where I work or to my school? And I will tell you this from my own experience, is I spent most of my life striving for a definition of success that never included me. I ended up at one of the most prestigious institutions to be reminded almost every single day that I did not belong. And, I'm still in therapy about the trauma of that time. And I'm always like, people are like, what can we do? I'm like, pay for my therapy, pay for my therapy. But for the educators out there, how are you taking care of yourselves? What are you doing for you? And part of what we need to do for ourselves sometimes is simply walk away. Walking away is also okay. And we saw that with Nicole Hannah-Jones recently with the UNC debacle. And I left the university myself in January. So I know sometimes it's just better to walk away. And then we could begin to mitigate our burnout through emotion regulation and self-care strategies. So once we understand what is causing our burnout, we can begin to think about, okay, now that I have an idea of what's causing my burnout, how do I come up with a self-care strategy for that? And you can also have a self-care inventory, which is, what am I going to do for my physicality? And what we know from research is that when you sleep well, exercise, and eat well, you are helping with mood regulation, right? Mood is longer duration than emotion. You feel an emotion quickly and then it goes away. You don't feel shocked for 20 hours, but you may be in a depressive mood for longer, right? So eating well, sleeping well, and moving your body is a good way, and building that in is a good way for you to take care of yourself. Are you building in self-care into your life? Like, have you put in time for vacation or for eating lunch? And I am guilty for never having eaten lunch when I ate lunch while I was walking when I was a teacher, or I had recess in my classroom and students were playing cards and I was still never really off. And then I worked after school. It was a whole lot. So I didn't take care of myself as a teacher because we tend to be a given profession. Mental, emotionally, what are you doing? Are you engaging in negative or positive self-talk? Are you positively reframing situations? Are you expressing gratitude? These are all sort of examples of self-care and emotion regulation strategies that you can engage in. And then some of us, want to connect spiritually. You can do meditation, prayer, or whatever grounds you. And then, of course, we're humans, so we do have the need for social support, and you may connect with your families and friends, and if you want to, therapists. But it's important for us to know that while self-care strategies can work, we definitely need to plan them and put them in, but self-care is part of the solution, right? Sometimes we need to lean on collective efforts for the burnout, the things that are causing our burnout. So I just want to put that out there and not make self-care the solution. It helps us manage what's happening in the world, but it doesn't, for example, dismantle systemic racism. So we need to sort of keep that in mind as well. Essentially, you have to do what Kevin Hart says, do you, boo-boo, do you. So take care of you. And then also don't forget your homies. And our young people need some tender, loving care too. And a high school senior, Haley, she wrote and put out on social media a letter to our teachers. And one of the things that she said that caught my eye and really sort of explained the state of our young people is our minds are filled with inescapable sadness and fear that we can't even comprehend at times, right? When there's that inescapable sadness and that inability to understand, There's so much anxiety that comes from that, but also the fear and sadness. And I have to give it up to many of the educators who put students' needs before your own. I mean, of course, that leads to emotional exhaustion, but you all did it. You did it because you're selfish, you're selfless, and that's how, and you think of others first. And so our young people need tender loving care too. And with all of the increase in mental health challenges that our nation has experienced, with all of the fervor for racial justice, we've seen in the nation and in our newspapers and our academic papers a call for social emotional learning. You see, these are just some of the articles, right? How it's, we need social emotional learning now more than before. It is a national priority. There's an uptick in SEL need. And what I will say is, yes, we do need social emotional learning. However, we have to be very clear that we cannot SEL away racism. I think too often we want to take the easy route and tell our students, okay, go breathe. Go breathe through racism, boo. No, you can't breathe through racism. You cannot SEL away racism. We have to ensure that we are addressing also the systemic. You're not gonna basically tell me that I need to breathe and then the racism is going to go away. So we really have to be honest with ourselves and understand that while SEL is helpful, it is not going to solve racism, right? We do need to apply an equity and anti-racist lens to SEL, because what we know of our education system is that it is an education founded on the ideals of whiteness. I have gotten to where I have gotten in life because I have perfected the ways of whiteness. And I had to learn to talk white, dress white, do all these things that I told were the correct way and would lead me to success. And honestly, it made me sick because I was told that my identity, who I was not welcome, and I was not enough, or I was too much. And so we can't just say, let's throw this intervention on without really dismantling oppressive policies, structures in our school system, and without also discussing and how oppression shows up in schools. And so we have to apply an equity and anti-racist lens, an abolitionist lens, and we have to have an understanding of the socio-political context as we think about SEL. Because if we don't do that, if we don't apply an equity and anti-racist lens to SEL, I've said this already and I'm gonna say it again, SEL risks turning into white supremacy with a hug. I'm gonna say that again. If we don't apply an equity, anti-racist, abolitionist lens to SEL risks turning into white supremacy with a hug. And essentially, you can take out SEL and put any intervention. You could put PBIS, you can put mindfulness, you could put breathing. If we don't, again, we have to interrogate and work to dismantle the oppressive structures in our schools. And so oftentimes people are like, yo, where do we begin? I don't know where we begin. And I always tell people, just start. How about that? Just start. And then don't stop. And don't stop. Because racial justice is not something that you can do overnight, check a box and say, I've read all these books and I'm good, I got it. I served on the Racial Justice Committee, so therefore I did the work. It is a practice. It's like we're always constantly doing this. I am learning and unlearning every single day. I am a Black biracial woman and I am learning and unlearning. What does it mean I have to ask myself every single day when I walk into a space, what does it mean for me to be a light-skinned Black woman, right? What privileges do I have access to? And these are the types of questions I invite you all to ask yourselves as you think about your power, your privilege, and the identity and the power and privilege that you get either from your identity or not, right? Racial justice is an outcome, it's deliberate, it's proactive, and it is all of our work. Because I cannot tell you how often I have spoken to Black, Indigenous people of color educators who were made to own, all of a sudden, the racial justice work after George Floyd, right? And so I think we really have to think about basically, we have to start doing this. Stop asking the wounded to do the work. I had to tell that to my colleagues. Please don't ask me to do the work. I am hurt, I am traumatized, I am wounded. It is your problem to fix. I happen to receive the brunt of racism, right? And so it is all of our work, but some of us are tired. Some of us are tired. And so I just want to say, like, some of you say, where do we start? I've written a piece. I've spoke to Edutopia about 6 ways to be an anti-racist. Again, there's no right way, just start with yourself. And then do it in community, right? Learn with the crew so that you can hold each other accountable. And part of this work of racial justice is affirming your students and not ignoring the larger context of where our students are coming from. And then, of course, not being paternalistic and saying, I know what you need, I'm gonna give it to you. Ask the community what they need. And additionally, I wrote another piece called How to Be an Anti-Racist Educator. And same thing, start with self. Engage in vigilant self-awareness of self. We have to acknowledge, I know we have a lot of people who are upset about acknowledging racism and white supremacy. I can't tell you how often, I have written for pieces and people have said, could you please take out white supremacy because not all of us are white supremacists. There's that discomfort that we have to interrogate, right? White supremacy, we have to understand what whiteness is, what white supremacy is, and then move from there and acknowledge it. And then we have to teach a representative history, right? We have whitewashed a history. We've wanted to call for neutrality, but who does neutrality benefit? And who does it erase? And of course, we have to talk with our students about race. And I can't tell you how often when I've worked with educators as a teacher educator and in my current role where teachers would say, hey, I don't want to come across as racist or say anything that may be misconstrued as bigotry. And I always tell folks, if that's what you're scared about, that's not so bad. You might feel a little embarrassed and uncomfortable, but try living every single day with the weight of racism and the brunt of racism. So we have to really, again, decide whose feelings and whose lives do we value when we have conversations of racism. And last, when you see racism, like they say in the MTA in New York City, when you see something, say something. When you see racism, do something. It is not enough to say, oh, I read the book. How are you going to change your life? How are you going to change how you live so that it doesn't contribute to racism? All right. So that's one of the things that I'd like to share with you. But, and some of the things I'd like to also share with you is how can we engage in these equity responsive practices to ensure that we are engaging in racially just practices, and practice. And so I would just break it down into ensure that we are engaging our students meaningfully, right? We have to, and the way we engage our students meaningfully is getting to know who they are and what they like, right? Of thinking of culturally responsive and student-centered practices, right? You can give students project-based learning, both virtually and in person or hybrid. And then of course, when you are doing check-ins, for example, ask your students a question and then model it, right? For students and, give them some parameters because it could be very, I remember when I had to do a check-in when I was back at work and, folks were talking about their farms and their lakes. And I became the insecure girl that I was when I was in boarding school around so much privilege and whiteness. And I was like, I don't have what they have. Like I'm like generations behind, right? Because, if we know our history, Black folks couldn't own land, right? We couldn't have property. And so that has impacted the wealth gap between Black and white folks since I was feeling a certain way about that. So it really helps to model check-ins. And then we have to maintain connection, whether it's hybrid, virtual, or not, that we offer that one-on-one time to connect with our students. And during those connections, ask students what they need. And then to survey students regularly, check in, what's working, what's not working, and then be open to changing, right? Teaching is iterative. If the pandemic didn't teach us that, I don't know what to say, but teaching is iterative. We are always constant learners. And I think you all know that already. And then of course we have to set students up for success by giving them the resources that they need to do well. If we don't give them the resources, we're really assessing privilege and not what students know. And then give students options. Some students may not want their video on. We have to be cool with that. It makes it harder to connect and to engage, but we have to understand, like, some students may feel insecure about letting you into their homes. And as someone who would not, I joked about this. I was like, listen, people gonna see a wall because I'm not gonna have the whole world see what's in my house. So, some people may not want that. And then build up your students, affirm them, and affirm them. And of course, our families, we can invite them into learning activities, even in the pandemic or not. We give them choice, whether to opt out. We communicate in varied ways. And we ask families, what's the best way for us to communicate with you? Because we've lost so many families during the pandemic. And then, of course, how are we supporting educators so that they can be the true partners of teaching and learning, right? Are we translating materials or sending guides or materials for how to use technology? I'm still learning. We heard a teacher say in the video that it was a learning curve. It's still a learning curve. And then obviously share lessons and information and resources with families. When I was a teacher, I had a blog spot and I said, this is where you go if you don't understand anything. My students used it too, but it was also helpful for families. And the same way you check in with students, check in with families. And one thing, as we think about equity responsive and racially just practices for everyone, I think we have to understand, like I said earlier, is that not everyone thrives online. However, we have to take note of who was thriving online, right? So you may have seen this in the New York Times a couple months ago, maybe half a year ago, actually. It says, you are out of your mind if you think I'm ever going back to school. And so this was essentially, and there's another, NPR story based in Portland about a student in Portland, 2 Black students, who said, you know what, I was thriving. A lot of Black students were thriving during the pandemic because they did not have to experience the over surveillance and the erasure. They can turn off their video and tune it out if they need to. So we have to pay attention. So how do we ensure that when our Black students go back to school, that they feel welcomed, that they're not experiencing the microaggressions? You speak well for a Black girl. Let me watch you to make sure you don't get in trouble. We know there's a ton of research on implicit bias in Black children. When my former colleague, Dr. Walter Gilliam, did a research where he gave, his team gave educators in the preschool setting a video to watch and said, there's some trouble happening in the classroom, and teachers' gaze went to Black children, particularly the Black boys. So we have to be mindful of that self-awareness so that we're not making our Black students ill and with the trauma of racism. But, adults felt that too, right? The New York Times recently wrote this piece about some women of color not wanting to go back to the office for similar reasons, right? They don't want to return. We don't want to return to microaggression and bias. And so just be mindful of that. How are we going to create and change and innovate spaces so that everyone feels welcome, despite the current backlash to critical race theory? Because folks don't know what they're talking about when it comes to what critical race theory is. So that's why I put the quotes. But, we have to be flexible with our time and assessments because of so much that all of us are going through. And we have to be compassionate as well with ourselves, with our partners, our families, our students, our colleagues, everyone. But of course, we can't forget to address racial trauma. And so as we think about teaching and leading for racial justice, I always tell folks to make a public apology or to just apologize. An apology is not just I'm sorry. It is I'm sorry, and it's also acknowledging the harm that's happened. It is not saying, now let's move forward, we can't undo the past. It is addressing what happened in the past. It's going back and saying, I wronged you, and now I want to do right. Too often we want to say, I'm sorry, and then walk forward without acknowledging the harm. That is actually more hurtful. And I say this from someone who has yet to receive a public apology. And also, we have to audit what's happening with equity in mind and with anti-racism mind to ensure that our pedagogy, our school discipline practices and policies, our hiring, and everything related to teaching is not complicit in racism and not complicit in racial trauma. So how are we going to engage in audits of what we do and how we do in the fabric of our schooling to ensure that it is not contributing to racial trauma of our young people? And then we have to create a reporting system, right? There's a ton of reporting systems for sexual harassment and assault, but we still are, because we're so scared to talk about racism, we really don't want to put it out there. But we need to be able to talk about, listen, that thing was racist that you said, like when you touched my hair, that was pretty racist, or when you said that thing. We need to have a reporting system. I received an email from my boarding school, it was an all-girls boarding school, about all of the sexual assault that happened and all of the legal cases that were going against the school. And I was like, imagine how long that list would have been if the Black students had shared the intersectional oppression that we received as Black high school students, right? We have to create that system. And of course, we have to hire, a more diverse teaching force, right? Do we have Black leaders? Do we have Black superintendents? And I'll tell you, we don't really have that many Black superintendents. So how are we going to create space and opportunities to increase diversity in our education system? And of course, we need to heal. We need to heal. We need to focus on that healing. And we need to provide opportunities for self-care and for teachers, specifically BIPOC teachers, to engage in healing racial battle fatigue. And then we have to abolish, once we figure out and do an audit and figure out what's not working, we have to abolish those systems that contribute to racial disparities. And above all, we must commit to coming together. And I think one way to start that is really learning an affinity, right? How can I learn an affinity about my identity and how it shows up in the world, how it gives me access to power and privilege, and work together in racial affinity before coming together in more heterogeneous groups. So apologize, do an audit, create a system for reporting racist behaviors, hire more diverse, and create a streamlined system for more leadership opportunities for BIPOC folks. Heal, abolish those practices that contribute to inequity, and then come together. And as we continue to think about the pandemic, because we were worried about Delta, now Epsilon is here. And so we don't know what September is going to look like, And so whatever we do for our pandemic safety plans, we have to ensure that affirming and loving up on our Black school community, and I'll say our BIPOC school community, that must be part of the pandemic plan too. And so as I close, I wanted to say it again, focus on healing. Like, I have never felt more healthy than walking away from a very toxic and abusive situation. And so as you all take care of yourselves, really take note of what is causing your burnout, what is causing you to hurt, where is your wound, and how can you heal that wound so that you can be your truest and full self and thrive as you deserve to thrive. And so keep that emotional well-being at the core, but also racial justice and equity, and create and hold space for healing for the whole community, for individual healing and for community healing. And as educators, you go back to the room, think about how you can build in healing into your instruction. Maybe have healing circles, maybe allow students to have journal activities where they're reflecting on an important, provocative question. And of course, keep trauma in mind. And how are you going to work with community and mental health support so that you can help your students in ways that you might not be able to. And then as we continue to think about healing, we cannot forget ensuring that our students have access to student-centered, culturally responsive, and anti-racist interactions and practices and policies. Because honestly, this is another Martin Luther, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. says, whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. If we have had paid attention to what was happening a year and a half ago and took the precautions to realize that, you know, the coronavirus spreads, right? And we thought it would stay in China. I thought it would stay in China. And I was like, oh, well, we'll be fine. And look at us now. We have changed our behaviors. And sometimes when I think about how we changed our behaviors for safety, it gives me hope, because it tells me that people have the potential to change for the greater humanity and for collective humanity, because whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And so as I leave you here, I want to say, as I started, I said, you know, I'm going to plant that tree anyway. Go plant your apple trees, y'all. Go plant those trees. This work is not easy. It is not for the meek, but our work as educators is revolutionary. So go plant that apple tree. I'm also want to share that I'm also in the process. I'm almost done. I need to edit the book now of completing White Rules for Black People, which is a book that is probably going to come out in 23 at this point. With, you know, so White Rules for Black People. And I always tell people, if that title makes you uncomfortable, again, interrogate why that is. And also, as you know, I started LiberatED, and we're having a virtual launch party where we have spoken word, we have student voice, and then we're gonna have a healing conversation about how we get free. And I'll be giving a keynote address there. So please definitely follow at LiberatED_SEL so that you can join our launch party, and then stay in touch. I'm happy to stay in touch. You can follow me, like the kids say, on Twitter and Instagram. Actually, the kids don't say that now. The kids say TikTok. I am not yet on TikTok. If you want to see go to my newsletter, there you go. That QR code will take you there, and then sign up for LiberatED. All that to say, as I close today, is that this work is important. It is doable. It is necessary. And we all can do it. It's all of our work. But above all, I love you. I love you.
Thank you so much, Dena. That was brave and very provocative, and it's given me so much to think about already. These are the kind of very profound conversations we have at AFT's Teach Conference. We're now going to shift gears a bit. Let me introduce these lovely folks you see behind me. I'm going to quickly introduce these members, and I want you to wave when I introduce you. Cheryl Schuff is a para-educator from the Harvard Federation of Paraprofessionals. Hi, Cheryl.
How are you?
Great, thank you for being here. And Lucretia Olivier is a school social worker at Jefferson Federation of Teachers member. Hi, Lucretia.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, thank you. And finally, Josephine Shelton Towns is a school social worker in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. Welcome, Josephine.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us at Teach 2021, and thank you for agreeing to be part of this roundtable where we'll talk a little bit more about social emotional learning and equity responsive practices. Dena Simmons offered some challenging ideas about social and emotional learning as we commonly understand it. Let's begin with reactions to her approach. Cheryl, will you start us off, please?
I'm sorry, what was the question again? Reactions to
reactions
Dena?
to what? Yes, reactions to what Dena Simmons was talking about today.
I thought it was awesome. I think she spoke about all of the elephants that are in the room that are typically not spoken of, or mentioned. And I just think that it was awesome. It was eye-opening and very informative.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Now, Lucretia, do you have any thoughts about Dr. Simmons' presentation?
Oh, I really enjoyed it. I liked the whole idea of when we're talking about the social emotional learning of how it's to the white standard. And I didn't, I'm getting ready to start this program next year in our school system with our sixth graders, and it really has made me stop and think about the program that I'm going to be teaching and making it an equal standard across the board for all, and and really looking at that program to make it work.
Thank you so much. You're planting that tree, huh? Now to
Yes.
Josephine, any reactions or reflections you'd like to share on Dr. Simmons' talk?
Sure, absolutely. I just want to say that I took a lot of notes and that Dr. Simmons was just on point about a lot of different things. But one of the things that stood out for me was the denial issue. The denial issue in terms of just the pandemic and the fact that we were going to do business as usual, okay? And based on, I think, that kind of philosophy kind of set us up, educators to think we're going to continue to run things normally as they are, but we're going to add this additional social emotional piece. We've been doing social emotional things in our district and probably all over, for a while. I agree that we need to increase it, but I think the issue of denial played a big part because we probably should have looked at approaching things just a little bit differently. So that was one thought. The other thought, her comment about self-inventory. I thought that was excellent. Again, that was on point. Again, we have to really get real with ourselves, sit back, take a look, and begin to really digest our belief systems and how we perceive things and how that impacts our ability to teach and also even to learn from the kids. And the last thing real fast I want to get in is about the burnout and the different things that Dr. Simmons mentioned about teacher burnout. And I also wanted to relate that to the fact that, our kids are in homes where their parents have some of the same concerns that relate to the issues of burnout. So again, they're coming to school having moved, having transitioned, having probably maybe dealt with death and loss issues. And, it's again, business as usual. We got to teach. So I think as educators, we need to kind of like really back up and we need to let people know that, if a kid's brain and research supports that, they can't take in this information, okay? They're not going to learn based on issues of being traumatized. And I think that that's so important that, we look at when we go back, because we don't know what we're walking into, as Dr. Simmons kind of hinted to, that, business as usual. We know what our mission is, but we still have to approach it a little bit differently and be a little bit more creative, knowing that our kids are coming to us at a different level. And our teachers are also dealing with their own concerns as well, okay?
Thank you, Josephine. You didn't only plant the tree, you're bearing fruit already. I love it.
Yes.
So Cheryl, let's get back to you and ask how have you come to use social and emotional learning in your professional practice? Why is it important to you?
It's important because it's what makes the nurturing part of the classroom. When we talk about identifying various behaviors in a classroom, it is often the peer educator that uses social, emotional, and learning to address students' behaviors when the teacher is unable to. For example, when a student has a breakdown, an educator familiar with the community and the culture of the student might have positive affirmation and familiarity. I'm so nervous, I'm sorry. With the student in order to facilitate and redirect to help a student become aware of their feelings and how they are reacting in an uncomfortable situation. And to do this without interruption in the classroom, I think it really comes down to what we all came into this profession for. We actually do care about the whole child. And once you have a rapport with a child that feels secure and comfortable and trusts you enough to share their most inner fears, I think it's a win situation.
So thank you, Cheryl. And don't be nervous. We're just talking and having a good time and a good conversation. I agree with everything you're saying. So I'd like to go to Lucretia. Can you share with us how you use social and emotional learning in your work as a school social worker?
Yes. I agree with everything Cheryl said, and I think that develops when you start teaching the students and helping them to identify feelings and emotions and what all is going on inside of them. It helps bring the connection with the adults that they say, hey, you're willing to listen to me, you're willing to hear what I have to say, and you have interest in me. it was about a year and a half ago. It was very beginning of the epidemic. And I was going in a classroom. I work in high school currently and getting ready to actually move to middle school. But working in high school, I was going into a classroom and working with some students and, thought that, everything was going well. I was teaching them how to, face some of their feelings and how things were going. And, it was right when the George Floyd things were happening. And one of my students in the classroom, we were talking about it and everybody was having a great discussion and people were listening to each other. And, I thought, hey, this is really a good, really good, getting down to the nitty gritty of things. And I really enjoyed the conversation. And one of the students who I had a relationship with and doing counseling with, challenged me and said, you don't know what it's like to be a young Black man walking down the street and being fearful. And he goes, and your children don't know that either, because he knew I have children. And I'm like, and I had to step back and I had to, tell him, yes, you are absolutely right. Can you please explain it to me? Can you help me to understand so that way I can help you and help everybody else? So being able, I think social emotional learning is not about just what we can teach them, but about what they can teach us as well, to be able to develop a communication between each other and an understanding and a wanting to learn from one another. We can give them tools, but they can also give us tools too for us to challenge our own thinking.
That is absolutely awesome, Lucretia. That's great. So now, Josephine, can you share with us how you use social and emotional learning in your practice also as a school social worker?
Yes. Evelyn, one thing I just want to mention that we know that not all school districts are fortunate to have school social workers. So
that is true.
Just in recognizing that, I do have to give a shout out to my school counselors and my school psychs who we work together as a team. So of course we have a variety of things that we do, from in the elementary offering second step to our elementary school kids, and in the middle school the counselors are doing SEL groups. And in the high school, they're also doing SEL groups, and it's a combination of the support team. So I guess my comment would be, I challenge districts to make sure that they're using their support staff in the manner that they need to use them in the area of their skill expertise, okay? And it just makes you think about, like in some districts, how the counselors are so busy doing the 504s and testing and some other things that, they have this need to do the social emotional, but they just don't have enough arms and enough time. So also we need to also be assure our partnerships are continued, okay? Those organizations and agencies that we've worked with over the last 18 months that have, been able to support our children and families, to make sure that we shore those up because they can provide additional, resources to, our district as well. Also, knowing that there were so many kids that we could not find because of various reasons. Some of them have just checked out. So going back in September or August or whenever you guys go back will mean teaching kids about doing school again, because so many of them, had to transition and adjust, and we know our kids are resilient, and that's a wonderful thing, but we are going to spend a fair amount of time in, teaching them what school is again and how school operates, regardless of if we're going remote or if we're going in person, and also helping and supporting the families to be able to support their, youngsters and young people in doing school as well.
Thank you so much, Josephine. You guys are all so impressive. I'm expecting to see a forest, because if we're all planting our trees, hopefully these kids will have a lot to breathe and to learn. So thank you so much, everyone. I'm just learning so much today. And as we all come out of the horrors of the past year, and let's be honest with each other, it has been a really difficult year. We have a real chance to make a new normal in our classrooms, our schools, and our lives. The pandemic taught us lots of things, many of them very painful, as Dr. Simmons said. But if we follow her and learn the lessons of the past year, we really can create the renaissance in public education Randy is talking about. Again, many thanks. Gracias. Now, please join me in watching these two inspiring videos. First up, we're going to hear from Hannah and Charlie Lucas, two Ashoka youth change makers. After experiencing the effects of mental illness in her own life, Hannah Lucas teamed up with her brother Charlie to create the Not Okay app, a mental health app that takes the guesswork out of asking for help. With the press of a button, users can notify trusted contacts and quickly get help. Then we'll hear from another dynamic duo, Dr. Primrose Cameron from the Florida Education Association and Ron Pollard, a custodian and president of the Orange Education Support Professionals Association. Together, they applied for an AFT Innovation Fund COVID-19 grant to reignite professional development statewide for school-based staff. This trauma training supports FEA members and helps to combat the psychological and mental health toll the pandemic has caused for educators, students, and families. And this is the kind of support that AFT has in place to have our members' backs. Before I sign off, I want to say thank you for joining me today. And tune in tomorrow at 10:30 Eastern Time for our final season, because there's more good stuff to come. Fed and I will host a roundtable discussion with the Deputy Secretary of Education, Cindy Martin. See you tomorrow. Hasta mañana, familia. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Lucas.
And I'm Charlie, and we're the co-creators of the Not Okay app.
Our mission here at Bug & Bee LLC is to make it easier for people to ask for help when they are not okay.
But mental illness is a massive problem. It's estimated that 1.1 billion people struggle with mental illness or substance abuse problems as of 2016.
And our generation, Gen Z, is the loneliest generation and claims to be worse in health than older generations.
And it has been that way since before the pandemic contributed to increasing numbers in loneliness.
Loneliness cuts life expectancy by about the same amount as smoking 15 cigarettes a day and more than obesity.
It's also associated with a greater risk of heart disease, depression, anxiety, and even dementia.
Now, I bet you're wondering how we got involved with mental health. It all started when I was in high school. I was a freshman in high school, and I started fainting. I started passing out pretty frequently. I ended up missing over 200 classes my freshman year, which is about pretty much half the year. I had like a wheelchair in school, a personal cold blue. It was really, really awful. I was bullied, harassed, and sexually threatened really badly. And this all just caused me to spiral deeper and deeper into depression and anxiety. I didn't know any other coping mechanisms. So I developed eating disorders, and I started self-harming until one night I couldn't help it and I had a suicide attempt. But luckily, my mom saved my life that night, and that's when I realized I needed a tool that not only I could use for my chronic illness, but my mental illness as well.
So when Hannah told me about her idea for the app, the first thing I said was, and I quote, "Let's go." Because I knew I could actually help her create this app, because ever since I was about 7, I've been teaching myself how to program and create apps. So on that very day, I started working on the wireframe and the workflow, which is basically how the app looks and how it works. The Not Okay app is a digital panic button that when pressed, a text message is sent to the user's up to 5 trusted contacts, alerting them that the user is not okay and needs help, along with the user's GPS location and direction.
These trusted contacts can be anyone you trust or see as a safe space. Friends, family, a therapist, or even a recovery partner.
With over 115,000 downloads and 80,000 Not Okay alerts, the Not Okay app is needed more now than ever.
But download the Not Okay app. It's completely free and easy to use, so make sure to share with your friends, family, and even students if you're an educator. Thank you so much for your time today.
And don't forget, it's okay to be not okay.
Greetings from sunny Florida. On behalf of the Florida Education Association, my name is Dr. Primrose Cameron, and I'm the Director of FEA's Professional Development and Educational Research Department. I'm here with my colleague and friend, Ron Pollard.
Well, thanks, Dr. Cameron. I'm a school-based custodian, president of the Orange Education Support Professionals Association, OESPA as we're known, and together we applied for a COVID-19 response grant from the AFT Innovation Fund. We did this to help reignite professional development statewide on behalf of school-based staff.
Our program, Across the Bridge, was designed with education staff professionals in mind who have worked tirelessly to ensure that an environment for learning and safety, especially during the pandemic, takes place. We identified high needs for professional development in the areas of self-care, student trauma, membership recruitment and retention, and leadership development, all of which are necessary to sustain a productive workforce.
And this project really is an effort to bring ESP locals together from across the state with a shared vision to tackle pertinent issues during these times. As a humble servant to public education, I am very passionate to defend the right of those that may not always be recognized for their leadership and contributions to student learning. Last year, during the pandemic, the ESP Public Policy Committee leaders, of which I am one, and FEA's Professional Development Department designed and scheduled interactive trainings, sessions with the assistants from national affiliates to focus on self-care, technology, trauma-informed practices, and leadership development. This could not have been accomplished without the support received from the AFT COVID-19 grant. 74 ESP members from 16 locals successfully completed their monthly trainings while also increasing their overall engagement with their local and state union.
And as Ron stated, we've created a shared vision for member recruitment, retention, and support. By bringing our ESPs together, we created momentum and shared energy. Follow-up meetings, conference calls, PDs, a Teacher of Color series, and a Wellness Wednesday, time and time again, kept the energy alive and encouraged members to continue to grow and be supportive of each other during this difficult time in history. This synergy will begin to be channeled into mobilizing members from all participating locals across the state. In addition to the trainings, each enrolled ESP member received a tablet, AFT Trauma-Informed Kit, FEA ATB shirt that Ron is wearing one of, and the ability to attend FEA Summer Academy and AFT Teach as recognized graduates of the ATB program. We're so proud of our ESP locals and the strength they've shown together on behalf of students throughout the pandemic.